So we don't have too much, I don't have too much in his history around it, except that he published his Totem and Taboo, offering that society is based on universal prohibition against incest, contrary to proper Jung's research. So he published his in 1913. So his area, as he published it together at 13, that was the Neptune Venus. He's going against that taboos. He's writing about against the taboos, against the guilt, against these confusions, Neptune squaring his Venus. At the same time, Jung's distancing from him, and it was the underbelly he wasn't expecting. And then in 1913, he publishes the book that's contrary. And Jung, I mean, the year before, Jung says, our work is different. And he starts going differently. And then Freud, he's established, he's motivated to business now. He puts his knowledge in his books out, and he got it out in that time. But it more or less crystallized the disruption. So in 1914 and 15, it just was, there was nothing more to build back. It was letting go. There was confusion. So 14 was a big shock. And it's still, by 1915, it had gone, it left, and he was still at 1916 was still, these were still disruptive years. We don't have anything, we don't really have anything in his bio around that. 1 second here. I'm going to pull up Freud's bio just because it has, Jung's bio, because it has a few more events of the interaction. So 1909, 1907 was his first meeting with Freud, which was just before this. He began working with Freud in 1907, going through 1908, 1909. So there's some discrepancy between these two dialogues. But in 1909, Jung opened his private practice of psychoanalysis. Let's see. In 1909, he lectured in the States. So 1909, he was lecturing in the States. No big hassle, just Saturn to Moon to Freud. Now let's just see. Okay, it was in and then it wasn't until 1912 he lectured, and then in 1912, in 1909, 1912, he announced his split up. So he's still working with Freud during this Uranus squaring his moon, but he wasn't. He was there, but he wasn't. But it was hurting Freud. Freud was being hurt, and he was being shocked, realizing that Jung was not on side. Jung was not really sharing what he was taking for himself and not backing him up. And when he decided he was going to, he was heartbroken because he thought of it like a partnership, and it was breaking the partnership. So for Freud, it had broken 6 months before it broke out, before Jung announced it, but he had already been let down enough. Now, Jung's chart had his sun in the 7th house. They both had the sun in the 7th house with the analyses, but Jung had the square to Neptune, whereas Freud had this conjunction to Uranus. So Freud had to break through things. So Jung was not that loyal or reliable with his wife or with Freud. But the expectation from Freud, he would only have shared if he thought that the student was going to be his student and carry on his teachings and things. So for it not to be, it really was the equivalent of a heartbreak during that time. 10 and 11. Now, let's just see. But they split with Freud, then Jung was isolated. Yeah, so then the war came in 14, 15. Okay, so that's end of Freud. So going back to his, that was the big thing. That was the insight to me. So look at that. He was heartbroken before. So by the time, I mean, Taurus is holding, they fixed it. They're not quick to respond. They try to anchor in, hold. As soon as holding in, he kept getting hurt, kept getting hurt. So by the time Jung said, it's over, I'm going, it was already gone. It wasn't like Freud didn't know it. He'd already been hurt as much as he could be. But it did create confusion around it. Confusion. The Neptune was squaring his Venus for the next couple of years about what loyalty is. So he had that confusion while Jung was having his falling away and pulling out of all the associations of everything Jung set him up for. He let go of his different careers, and he was going into a more personal psychosis search. But that would have been a kind of aloneness, or no one else is there. What's next? And 1914, 15, when they finally meet and split. So we've already seen the main story happening with the Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus. I mean, I'm talking fast. I spent hours looking at this, walking through it. I was spending time over the weekend preparing as I'm preparing it and looking at it and then saying, oh, look at this, look at that. And if I were like, and I just tipped the surface. I mean, I'd have to go find a real diary and read it that went through these times in detail to really see this play out. But if you looked at Saturn, when they met, Saturn's opposing his Mars. He's overworked. He's working hard. A student comes in. Saturn conjuncts his Venus. So he's making commitments. Yeah, this is what I want. It makes commitments. At the very same time, he's making the commitments. The commitments are breaking up. The emotions are breaking up. In 1910. 1911, Saturn's on his descendant. He's ready for commitments to share with other people. I conjunct the Sun. He's ready to make, he's trying to make commitments, trying to make this work. But it's not, it's against the grain because you have someone who has the potential, is listening to all of yours, but he's got his own agenda. It's not exactly there. And so in the same time, Freud was making commitments to his work anyways. He just was having to do, he may have to do this on my own. Then Saturn squared his midheaven, conjunct his Mercury through 2012. So Jung's going his own way. They still worked a bit more together, but Freud was holding his own and carrying Saturn conjunct his Mercury, Saturn conjunct his Moon. These are all things forcing him to live in his own, getting his own work and getting things together, which he did. And it was letting go. By 14, 15, he's letting go of the old things. And then Saturn squared his Mars and his Venus 15, 16. So he's moving on and working on through this. So it was a big disruption at the time, but once it was done, Freud would let it go. He probably festered on it while Neptune was there and confused around it for a couple of years. But then thinking, and then finally when he let go, that would be it. He let go and he moved on with his life. So how are we doing for time? Oh, good. Okay, good. So this is like in 1920, Freud's oldest daughter dies. 1920, just after this, and 22, he's diagnosed with gum cancer, which, but like it just continually surgery in 23 to remove part of his jaw and gums. As condition steadily worsens until his death in 39. So 32. So another 17 more years, he lived with a cancer of the gums and the jaw. But okay, let's go back to the Saturn cycle. So by 1912, Saturn's conjuncting his Sun. We saw it here. There's a Saturn conjuncting his Sun. 1912. Just as Jung saying we're going separate ways, I'm doing something different. He's really established and he knows what he's doing. He's set up and doing his own thing. He's functionally established and forcing commitments to be on his own and work. That's a Saturn to his Sun and his Mercury. That's not a bad thing. Those are strong working things. Whereas if you go back and look at Jung's chart, his was disorienting, disruption. It was like he had 2 or 3 years where everything was falling apart. And then the war came in and he had to work for the concentration camp, and then he came out and he had to build up. Then he started his career after that. So Jung fell out of Freud's world, but Freud was well established and was maintaining his connections and work and carrying on. And he had his family to deal with him, to in a way centered him, but the Saturn by 2011 was on the conjunct his Sun. So then from there, it built up for the next 7 years, it built up to his midheaven. His midheaven was in 1918, 1919. And again, we don't have anything. That's just before his daughter died. I'm not sure what he was publishing or whatever, but he was on a straight building up, efficient, most functional time. This is a time when you work with other people, you do things with other people, being involved with other people. So in Freud's chart, I would have said, you're supposed to be working, you're supposed to be meeting with other people. It just meant you weren't supposed to be you were putting too much attention and too much energy into Jung, and you have to carry on the stuff on your own. And there's more other people you're going to be building this up. And he did. He built up his own thing. His stuff didn't fall apart because Jung went away. Jung just went a different way. But on the personal interrelationship, Jung with his Sun square Neptune was unreliable. And as a past memory for Freud, he had Neptune Moon. He would remember the sorrows of the past and leave it behind and work to get a practical take to go forward. Now, after this, then his daughter died. The Saturn hit his ascendant again in 24, 25. So again, we don't have anything in there. So Saturn's going below on the horizon. 26, it gets to the IC in 34. So in that time, he receives his Goethe Prize. But by 32, Hitler comes in power. By 33, Saturn getting up, squaring his sun, is coming down to the IC. So Hitler starts burning his books. The Nazis start burning his books. And then by 38, let's see, by 38, when just after Saturn squared Saturn, it's coming up through the fifth house. His Hitler annexed Austria, and then he would have been online. He had to just get out of the country, so they went to England, to London, and the family all went to London, and he only lived another year there. By 39 he died, so he didn't get to the Saturn building up another time. So everyone has a Saturn cycle. Like, that's why I say I don't like using the Saturn graph like from the report. It's all there. I can use it if I have to in a hurry, but it organizes it quickly. You got it all right there. But really, I like to separate it and see these phases and see them moving. I see Saturn above the horizon, Saturn below, Saturn rising, going across the angles, conjuncting the sun, opposing the sun, and the Saturn to itself for the ages. And I like to see those going along, and that gives me the time frame that his Saturn ego or his life is maturing along. Once I have that, and we saw that he was in this, he'd already been motivated, Freud, and he started to build up and wanted to build up new capacities to express himself and stretch and build up new things. And he's in the middle of that when Saturn's in his fifth house, when he's meeting Jung, and he becomes my student. I've got a protege, I've got a student, I've got this, and he starts sharing his information with Jung, who both of them know how to mirror and they share. It's just Freud was the exciting, radical one, and Jung had not everything was as it seems. He had Nectum square sun. He wasn't always totally dedicated. He could be dedicated one place, but also be in other places. So he was learning all the Freudian material, but at the same time, he was still maintaining his psychic and mystical agenda. So in the relationship between the two, it was Jung that was not the reliable student, and Freud that was let down. And then the universe changed. But both people were powerful people that changed the way of thinking in the world. They changed the Western thinking. And Jung was the one who pulled it more into the Eastern thought and into the mystical ways. But Freud changed brought out the nature of psychology and psychotherapy, and it profoundly changes the so in a way, Jung was a little bit more practical and not heading towards the religious or mystical side, although in his own life he maintained he was totally steady. But Freud was the one who, Jung was the one who went more mystical and went other ways, and he didn't exactly fit into what would seem the narrowness of Freud. He's just judging this way, just judging this way or that way. However, Freud's sharpness and his sexual perceptions were very, very insightful and very clear. It's interesting that Freud didn't get into I Ching, but his teachings and his work was very yin-yang, male-female oriented. In a clearer way, Jung was more fascinated with the synchronicity and how you get the information, but the information was really yin and yang, male and female, the I Ching with some philosophy about the mystical sides of it. So it's a fascinating mixture between these three. It would have been easy to spend a whole day, go through his natal transit, and go through the Saturn transit and look at the 8-year graph, or go through specific times in his life. I wanted to just work these two charts so you saw how they ran into each other and separated from each other and the energy that working. I'm not sure what each society or each group or the Jungians or the Freudians would think of this. You know, it's just the way it is from astrology. I'm certainly sure that Jung was aware of his horoscope and was aware these things were going on.